But the issue I have really, Tim, is people come to me when it's too late. They come to me when there's an issue, and the whole purpose, the whole mission for me is to try and get people to be proactive. Because ultimately, what you've got is, as I said at the upset, at the beginning there, it was like everybody's got trade secrets, right? But nobody can defend them. Nobody can defend them because, as you said, in that scenario where somebody walks out with a customer list, yeah, we got a case. They walked out with a customer list. And as I think I heard you say, but there's case law around this. Okay, so we go to court. The judge says, you need to show me that he knew this was the customer list was a trade secret. You need to show me that it was managed as a trade secret. You need to show me that he had or she had, contracts that required him to defend trade secrets. Because if none of those are fulfilled, then there's no case to answer.
Right.
And that's what you find in most cases. You don't actually have people think they've got trade secrets, but people don't actually put the structure around them to enact a trade secret program. And the issue we've got here, Tim Schnur, sorry, at the head of the program, 12 years ago, 10 years ago, when we were working on this in a big way, the world was around patents. And I think, as you've alluded to, patents are no longer what they used to be. In your courts in the States, when we go to the court with our patents, 75% of the time, the claims in those patents are found to be invalid. So everybody is now saying, IBM are now saying, you can't rely on patents. You need patents, but you need trade secrets. Now, when people say IP, they think patent and trademark. As you said, they don't think know-how, expertise, confidential information, and they may think trade secrets, but they're unregistered rights. So there's no governmental driven program for you to put in place to capture that. And as Catherine's just outlined, there are steps you need to take. But in my experience, most organizations are not taking those steps. And that means they're going to fall over.
Yeah.
They may think they have trade secrets. 80% of execs in a recent EUI study, Economist Intelligence Unit EIU study, said they got trade secrets. But 80% of those hadn't put the processes in place to manage and defend those trade secrets.
And there
And
you
that's
go,
big
right?
companies, by the way. That's
And
not SMBs.
and
So
that's a lot of what I tend to talk about, right?
Falls
So
right in your wheelhouse, right, Tim? And it sounds
I know,
perfect.
right? So
There you go. There's the softball.
right? So everybody likes to talk about CIS controls, right? Everybody likes to talk about, where do we go, what framework, right? So we talk a lot about CIS, IG1, asset management. But when we think asset management, we think switches and printers and laptops. We don't think about customer lists, or in the case of the brewery, the recipe, or other aspects of the business, right? So, there's a lot of different things to consider in the asset category, right? This is why having two parts, a data classification document, like things like Velo can help you do, classifying the data. But even before that, having an information classification policy, talking about information that's within the business, right? We do hear a lot about PII or social security numbers or CUI. We hear about those things. We don't ever really talk as an MSP to our customers about customer lists, patents. Yeah, we mentioned that a few minutes ago, but their secret sauce on how they're doing their business, where their data, all those other parts of the business that we just tend to ignore or forget or not even think about.
Right. Yeah. And I think, both John and Catherine said one thing each that kind of perked my ears up, something newer that I've been doing with my clients as I onboard them to vCISO services. And that's, crown jewels, thinking of them as crown jewels, and then actually showing that we're managing these trade secrets as trade secrets. And so there's a GRC software that I'm using for a couple clients that have a lot of this information, and they take you through what's called a crown jewels exercise. And so you get all the executives in a room and you do these workshops to say, hey, what are our trade secrets? What are our M&A? What is our roadmap, formulas? All these different pieces of data. And I was like, well, yeah, what about this server? It's on that server. And it's like, no, we have to think more about the data. Let's talk about the data, and then we can map that through to our assets, right? Let's identify what the trade secrets are, what are our most critical crown jewels, and what constitute an existential event, right? Because trade secrets walking out the door, it's not like a ransomware, you're immediately down in the water, but that could have been an existential event 1 year from now when your competition and your competitive edge is completely eroded because of it. So I think it's really important that you start identifying those, especially at an executive level, and get buy-in on the program that we're going to start managing these as trade secrets and protecting them as such. And so I really appreciate both of the perspectives that John and Catherine brought to that.
Yeah. So Catherine, I was going to talk a little bit about like when an employee joins a firm, what are some of the things that lock in those trade secrets or intangible assets? You want to talk a little bit about, contracts and things like that?
Yeah, sure. I would even back up a little bit before the employee is onboarded, and want to emphasize the importance of screening employees, particularly those that are going to be filling high consequence positions. You want to try to eliminate bad actors from coming into the organization as much as possible, because once they're in, then you're dealing with a lot of issues, right? But screening is so important, and many organizations do background checks. Many of them don't. And when they do background checks, they're pretty minimal. You'd be surprised at how many organizations and companies don't check the education and degrees, right? And that may not seem like a big thing, but there's so many employees who do lie about that, and it becomes an integrity issue, right? Which can then lead to other behaviors once they're in the organization. Right. But verifying their past employment and what they did, and speaking to references and past supervisors to determine if there were any issues is so critically important. So very important to really start at the very, very beginning. And then, of course, once they come on board, to get that training about how to handle those intellectual and critical assets in the organization. And that shouldn't just be done, it's not one and done. That should be done at least on an annual basis. Yeah. And then have continuous awareness throughout the year across the workforce. But yes, absolutely, Tim, having those agreements in place in the employee contract, as far as, how they're going to protect company information, confidentiality agreements, right? NDAs, non-competes. Now they're looking at doing away with non-compete agreements in some sectors. So that's even more of a reason for companies to put in those extra measures in place.
Good points, really good points.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I was just going to say,
go ahead. We'll get to Shane's in a minute.
I was just going to add a quick rider onto that, is that, especially with the non-competes and those being irrelevant basically now, it's like, how do you control residuals at all? It's almost meaningless, right? So, yeah, anyways.
Yeah.
So let me pull up Shane's comment.
Catherine's.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
Go ahead.
So Catherine's point, that just underlines and re-emphasizes the importance of trade secrets, that non-competes are eroding. If you've got a trade secrets program in place, that's how you defend your confidential information and know-how these days, because non-competes are not sufficient. I just wanted to pick up on NDA, because I think they are absolutely essential, but I think they are utilized in a very loose and fast way. I keep saying to my clients, okay, so you got an NDA, so you're good, right? Well, yeah, we're good. Okay, so how do you detect if somebody's taken your confidential information? How can you detect it?
Right.
How do you know they've done it?
You have Cavello, right, Tim? How do you detect it? Well, you label it appropriately. You have a policy, you have a procedure, you have enforcement stuff in those policies and procedures that employees have been trained on through handbooks and other stuff. Then you use Cavello to actually, I'm sorry, I digress.
No, I mean, so John, Tim's jumping right ahead to the court case, John, right? In 3 years from now, it's like I kind of asked you before, I'm like, if you could do it all again, right, you'd have great contracts, you'd have an NDA, you'd have trade secret catalog, then you'd have the actual cybersecurity tools enforcing those.
New term, trade secret catalog.
Yeah.
How many people have actually talked about trade secret
catalogs? I'll let John do that one. But the digital paper trail is possible now, where you can catch these people red-handed, and I don't know what movie it is. We're like, don't get caught, right? Like, well, now guess what? You will get caught, and as soon as more people are caught, we can build. People will understand that like they get in trouble. Anyone has a friend or people they know in finance, like people get caught for this all the time, like taking a deck out of a bank or something, or people actually do get caught, and there are serious consequences. So it's less common in the SMB world. It will become more common, right? Like John said, like non-competes aren't existent, but like there are ways to go about it here. Where, by the way, when you work somewhere, just because you made that deck, it's not yours. I'm sorry. Like you don't get to walk out the door with it. The customer list. Yeah, that's right. So,
I'm literally going through an employee contract today, and there's a big paragraph from our legal team about work product, and I was like, oh, that's a good idea. Thank goodness I have lawyers that know that stuff better than I do, because I'm like, oh yeah, like I don't want them stealing my decks, or whatever. But yeah, interesting thoughts.
John, why don't you define trade secret catalog and why it's important and what it does for you, what kind of leverage it gives you?
Yeah, perfect. And it carries on from, I think Catherine mentioned having a list, just identifying what it is you've got. I think the first thing I say to clients is prioritize what information would you least like your competitors to get their hands on. If you left your business tomorrow to set up in competition, what would you really like to take with you? And that starts to help people to prioritize, as you said, what's existential, what's going to damage the sort of the bottom line, and so on and so forth. You put in that kind of priority, you start to get the list. You then need to capture the trade secrets, and this is the catalog. So you need a cataloging system to manage them, and you're not actually capturing the actual trade secret here. You're using metadata to describe it. So the description, brief summary of what it does without revealing the secret source, and then who's responsible for it, who came up with it, who created it, what dates, the date of origination, really important. Who it's been socialized with, under what contracts, when those contracts, etc. And you do it once, but you have to keep on top of it. So there's a 3, 6 month, 12-month review cycle on that. So there's two separate things. I guess there's maybe three, a rough list and then a catalog on a system. But then you also need to document the trade secrets. You need to actually document those separately, because you need to be able to point back to 5th of December 2017 when you actually came up with that customer list or that know-how. You need to be able to prove that you had it at that point in time. So again, really interested to hear what you guys have got to say about date stamping. What technology would you use for digital rights management to show that you had that document, as of 5th of December 2017? Really important, of course, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Catherine, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Sorry about that.
No.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything that John has said. And I know Tim mentioned it a little bit at the beginning, the importance of having a data classification program within the organization for a couple reasons, right? First is when you label documents as, business confidential or sensitive or public, there's no excuse if employees really mishandle it that they didn't know, because it's, there's a big label right there staring at them in the face. But with that, you need the training, and again, repetitive training of how to handle these different levels and classifications of information, how to store them, how to travel, or when they're in transit, how to dispose of them, and that has to be constantly reiterated so people don't forget. But I think going back to what John was mentioning, and that timestamp, and John, this is probably more in your lane, but when you demonstrate that you have taken measures to try to protect certain types of information, in this case IP or intellectual assets, and there is an incident of IP theft that happens, or, some kind of disclosure or, corporate espionage, then, especially from an insider, then it has teeth from a legal perspective, that it demonstrates that the company did take certain steps to protect that data, to make it stand out from other data. And this way, when it does go to court, they can demonstrate that.
Awesome.
Yeah. So it was kind of funny because we do our documentation reviews frequently throughout the course of the year, month after month after month, and I was looking at the information classification policy that was written in 2006, and it literally talks about business, identifying stuff within the business and labeling it BII, right, instead of PII. It's business information, right, instead of personal information, right? And John, I think you brought it up about metadata, right, and date time stamping of stuff. Yeah, so there are some kind of put a document on your computer, it gets date time stamped. But now in this world of SaaS, where things kind of live in SaaS, actually one of the things that we did with our product, and I'm not going to plug my product, but what I'm going to say is there's an actual standardized format of how you do a date time stamp according to the world of IP lawyers and people like Catherine and John. And so when I started to put this together, I'm like, I want to make sure that I'm using the international standard of date time. And I actually had to go back to my developers and was like, change these database fields to this structure so that it meets this requirement. And people, and they thought I was crazy. And I'm like, no, there's things like lots of stuff to think about. So even just all the way down to the date timestamp and how that is formatted and measured and retained along the way.
Yeah. So, and Tim, on top of that, like I said, the cybersecurity tools are, they're not built for this, but they're doing a great job enforcing it. The actions or the activity, the data access history. What did an employee do the last 2 weeks before they left? What did they access? Who did they send files to?
You mean IG7, IG8, the audit logging stuff? I always forget the control numbers. Don't hold me to the numbers, but audit logging, that's a thing.
And then, as you said, things being marked. You can even mark files with. I joke about this. I don't know if anyone saw this on CNBC, that people were putting white text on resumes to submit, and then they'd have 5,000 words of metadata, and they'd get an interview maybe, right? Because the machine is reading it, right? But there's a lot of tricks. There's watermarking. There's white text. There's it's actually better because Catherine said, it clearly says confidential, clearly says trade secret, clearly says this. I've got an employee contract that says don't misappropriate that. So, it's really fitting nicely into left of boom, people processes and technology. Like all this stuff can really slot into Tim's policies and procedures and things like that. And then you really have the tools here to enforce it. Right. And the more people that get caught, unfortunately, people will be afraid of actually getting caught and be, and realize they just can't walk out with things. And because a lot of times it's just really obvious. And that's how those, but we talked about, I don't know if we talked about Uber, Waymo, right? That wasn't a patent trial, right? That was a trade secret case, right? They walked out with autonomous driving patents. Clearly, most of our clients are not autonomous driving companies, but they still have customer lists and they just have so much intelligence about the company. And by the way, when that employee leaves, they're not going to some random company. They are always going to the direct competitor, right? I'm going to use those skills and bring them across the street and go to the direct competitor. So
I see Jesse keep trying to chime in here, my friend.
Jesse. I'm smiling because I'm thinking about a specific incident that happened early on in our MSP, and this was years ago. We had a salesperson that we caught wind that he was leaving. I don't know exactly how, but we, put some monitoring on his computer, and sure enough, he caught him red-handed moving customer lists out to his personal OneDrive. Luckily caught him before he, and confronted him about it. He admitted it, and there was some legal action. I think the ownership was pretty pretty lenient in that they didn't, they didn't litigate against him. They just did a cease and desist and said, hey, you can't have contact with the rest of the company and things like that. So, but that was a good example of catching it. So that's where I really wanted to go with this and get a feedback from John and Catherine is, yeah, I think the point to that is that, right, once that was happened, every other salesperson kind of knew like, okay, there's a chance this could happen. So let's not, we don't want to do that basically. But barring that,